Hello everyone. I know it's been a while, but I'm back. I'm gonna start trying to make a few videos here. I want to kind of expand upon my training videos a little bit, as well as just some topical videos. I got some ideas working on the pipeline. Had some technical difficulties, but I think I'm ready to get going again here. So today, what I want to talk about is just the board setup, the map and the initial setup of pieces, and what are some of the important areas. So, a lot of people find ways to compare Axis and Allies to chess, and I'm not a big chess player. I've played some, played enough, but the one principle I know is control the center. And so when we're looking at the map here in Axis and Allies, I feel like that that is one of the best analogies I can come to. That is a critical part, and that's control the center, which is right in here, the center of the main landmass of the map. So in here, we've got, and particularly West Russia, Ukraine, Caucasus, Kazakh, and I'm even going to throw Karelia in there. So I'm going to talk about some of those. Again, I'm talking about the strategic important areas to know about, but I'm taking the assumption, of course, your capitals are critical. They're high value, and your victory cities are critical points for winning the game. So I'm not necessarily going into that. I'm just talking about more about the strategic components of the overall game and control of the game. But yes, I don't want to just skip over the fact that all your capitals are absolutely critical. Your victory cities are important. Um, so just wanted to cover that real quick. But I want to really talk about, again, in the center of the board here and how everything kind of steps up. And probably to me early on, one of the most important things is West Russia here. And the key to West Russia is the fact that it actually borders 3 of the factories that Russia can build out of. So if Germany's in control here, then Russia has to abandon 2 of these in all likelihood. So the moment that the Axis gets to control West Russia, the Russian and the Allies, they can only really stack 1 territory typically against Axis, against their main stack at least. So that means they have to prioritize stacking Moscow, and then they have to start giving up Caucasus, and either to trading or potentially even to a stack to the Axis. So West Russia is kind of the gateway into these other territories. So this is a critical area for allies to stack or dead zone for as long as possible. Eventually that'll, in a long-standing game, that's going to become more hard to do, but it's very important. This is a critical territory for allies to focus on earlier. Kind of a gateway to West Russia is Ukraine. So West Russia is really valuable. Caucasus is really valuable, as I'm going to talk about. So again, knowing that the allies can only really stack ones against your main stack, if you get a main stack into Ukraine as Axis, then again, they're going to have to give up one of these 2, and either to trading or potentially a stack. So if they give up Caucasus, that's a 4-point territory and a factory. If they give up West Russia, then like we talked about, that's already getting them right next to Moscow and creating issues. Now, so Ukraine is an important one to keep an eye on, but generally, the Axis guys be careful. They can't send everything here because they'll let open the gate to Karelia, which is another one of those important territories, because Karelia is the gateway for the Allies typically to get their units into, for the US and the UK in particular, get their units into Moscow and into pressuring Germany. Sure, they'll be trading elsewise and whatnot, but their main army is going to be shucking from C-Zone 10 into Norway and Finland, and UK bringing them into Norway and Finland. So the moment the Allies are able to stack Karelia, then their units can move freely into Moscow to reinforce, or they can move into Europe and start pressuring Germany. So Axis does have to be careful if they go anything towards Ukraine. They don't want to just free this entirely up. So Karelia is the next key one for the Axis to control for as long as they can. It starts in Russia's hands, but Germany can pretty quickly take that out of Russia's hands, and just about every game you're going to see Russia immediately abandons that at their turn one because they simply can't hold that against the German setup. So Axis, they want to control this, either stack or at the very least have this dead zoned from the Allies. If they can get into Ukraine to force West Russia or Caucasus to be abandoned, and then eventually into West Russia to make them absolutely abandon Caucasus and have to turtle into Moscow, the Greater. A lot of times, Axis will actually come up to a Karelia stack and then work their way into West Russia and not go to Ukraine. But I didn't want to fail mentioning that Ukraine can be a setup for that expansion. So then we get down in here into the Caucasus and Kazakh. So these two territories, these are critical spots for controlling both the Axis flow as they are trying to push into Moscow, as well as Japan coming into Moscow. They also are critical points that can tie up Persia and any connection between India and Africa. And this goes either way, whether Axis is controlling these or Allies is controlling these. If the other has India and they want to try to reinforce Africa, they have to go through Persia. And if you have a stack here, you can dead zone Persia to make them have to use transports, which is much, much more inefficient. Well, I shouldn't say that. It's efficient, it's quicker to get them to jump over there, but then you got to have all the boats to fight the planes and all that aspect, and you're also losing your transports from working on the backside. So really, both allies, they'd like to be able to trickle units this way, or if Japan gets a control of India, they'd like to trickle units into Africa. But if you've got a stack sitting up here, it can be dead zoned. Of course, from the Axis standpoint, if they get control of Caucasus, especially like in a KJF game, then Germany's producing 4 units right next door to Moscow. So that's going to be a big boon, as well as if it's a KGF and Japan gets control of this territory, then that's 4 units being produced right up here in the front lines as well. Kazakh, this is the key one, especially into the KGFs and Japan trying to get in. So if you count from Tokyo itself, if I built a unit here, built a infantry here, it's going to take them 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 turns to go through Archangel, Vologda, or Novosibirsk. I apologize about my pronunciations, but it's going to take them 5 turns to go through any of these to be then hitting Moscow. Whereas if they're here, turn 1 can be either Kwangtung or Yunnan down here, and then turn 2, 3, and turn 4, they're hitting Moscow. So through Kazakh is the shortest way for troops from Tokyo to get to Moscow. And that's critical. That's very important because the shorter the supply lines, the easier you're able to reinforce it. So Kazakh is an incredibly important spot for Japan to stack, maybe build a factory in here, and then be able to start working on Moscow, as well as dead zoning Persia and being able to pivot back into India if need be. So Kazakh would be the next main territory here in the middle that I'd say. Kind of hit on Persia. Persia is definitely a critical one because, again, this is the zone from Moscow to India, and because of the neutral territories in here, this is the only way into India from this direction, which is a lot of times where the KJFs are coming from. Vice versa, it's also the only way coming from India coming out. So Persia is a critical spot in of itself. The only other land-based territory, well, two ones that I'll talk about as far as strategic importance. If you are facing a KJF, then the Money Islands, being Philippines, Borneo, and the East Indies down here, these are critical for allies to get control of as soon as possible. And most people are going to like putting factories up on these guys for the allies when they're doing a KJF, to start stacking in this direction. So they're big money values. They're also big areas where you can produce lots of units at one time. So more so, and when facing a KJF, these become more critical. The one other land place that I like, and this is more of a me thing, I actually really like Northwest Europe here. And, you know, I mean, like I said, all the victory seas are important, but Northwest Europe, and sometimes I maybe play this to a fault, but when you've got Air Force for Germany on Northwest Europe, then fighters can cover to Sea Zone 3. They can cover 5, 6, 7, and 8 easy enough. Be careful if you're new. This part of the land is directly connecting to 8, so they can also go 1, 2 to Sea Zone 13, 3, 4 back. So fighters can help control shutting off the med, so to where if they're going to do allies are doing a med shuck type strategy, they can put pressure all along the sea zones here, as well as Sea Zone 3, where they're generally going to want to have a navy shucking into Norway and Finland. So by having pressure on as many sea zones as they can, it requires allies to buy more boats to protect their transports they're trying to move around. If you get a bomber in here on Northwest Europe, that also threatens Sea Zone 10, which is again another important spot where allies are generally staging transports off of. So I really like to hold Northwest Europe, and I like to keep my Air Force here as long as I can without hampering my Eastern Front, of course, with Germany. And because the more you can mess up the Allied shipping and their shucking and how they move the transports over, if you can slow up their logistics, make them have to build more boats, that's just going to slow their pressure on Germany in the big run, especially early on. Sea zones, there's not a whole lot to talk about sea zones. Most of the time, the Allies are going to have pretty good control of the Atlantic. There's not a lot of battling after the first round or two, whether KJF or KGF, until late game, possibly. And then the Pacific is a little more important in KJF, but there are so many ways of approaching KJF at this point. There's not a whole lot to say here. The things that I do like to point out, Sea Zone 64 has access to both sides of Japan, both Sea Zone 62 and 60, so that's a good place to be able to disrupt any production going in here if you got a stack there possibly, especially if you also have a fleet going down in the lower part, then it stretches Japan out. The other sea zones that some people overlook the importance of, Sea Zone 45 here is a really good one. One, if they don't do Pearl Harbor, then the carrier can come here, and fighters off of a carrier in 45 can land in India, US-2, to help prevent the Japan 3 timing, if you will. So that's a nice sea zone for getting there. But also, there are times when you're doing a KJF that if you got your fleet stacked to 45, then they can threaten Philippines, 2 routes to get to Borneo, as well as threaten East Indies. All 3 money islands can be threatened from here when you get into that position. So that's just a nice one, both in the KJF and KGF early, to get fighters over when need be. Another sea zone I like to point out the utility of is Sea Zone 34 for Axis powers, especially again talking about a KGF, when Japan can get their carriers and fighters sitting in here, they can be fighting and working and trading in Africa. They can reach Moscow to attack Moscow, as well as be trading these territories around Moscow. They also can fly to Italy, France, Berlin, and Karelia, all from 34, which is important for preventing 1-2 ally attacks, as well as potentially locking up a victory city win in there. So that's just a really strong place for the Japan fleet, and the KGF is C-Zone 34. And yes, one last thing I did want to talk about. So that's the territories and the sea zones, is just the initial setup of the pieces. So if we come up here and we check out our war report at the very beginning of the game, notice Axis has 185 attack power versus Allies 169. So Axis has the stronger forces on the board to start the game. Meanwhile, Axis national production is 71, whereas Allies are sitting here with 97 to start with. So to start the game, generally speaking, Axis have the stronger army, Air Force units, and Allies have the better income, the more money. So the other part to that is, you'll notice good old US, they're stuck on an island of their own in essence, and it's going to take them a few turns till their units get into there. So Allies are going to be short on the mainland the units of the Americans. They're going to take a few turns to get there. And yes, Japan also has to come from an island, but Japan can be onto the mainland in one turn, whereas the Americans, they got to build more transports, as well as it's going to take at least 2 to 3 turns really to get shucking established. So you got a couple turns advantage in there. So Axis powers have more on the mainland, especially right in through Germany, of course. They have more units and more powerful units on the mainland and coming into the mainland right off the bat than the Allies do. So early game favors the Axis. So there are many strategies where the Axis can create a quick win by pressuring through Russia real fast, or getting the victory city win in right around turn 4, turn 5-ish. So that's Axis advantage. Allies, again, they have the money, so given enough time, they're going to build more units and they're going to ship them in, and they're going to eventually take over the lead as far as units and attack power if Axis doesn't do something about it. So as a general rule, Axis either wants to win the game fast, or they need to, they need to establish income quickly. So Japan and a KGF needs to expand, get as much income as they can, and eventually find ways to start contesting Africa if this is going to go for a long game. And in the KJF, Germany is trying to get through Russia as fast as possible, and then through India and Africa to secure the income. So Axis, they either need to win fast, or they need to get pressure and then find ways to contest the income. A lot of time that comes down to Africa. So they need to be finding ways there. Allies, they need to be safe, don't lose too much ground, build points, use their money, maintain their money spots as long as they can, and then start feeding the units in. So again, hope you enjoyed the video, and keep an eye out for the future videos coming up soon on a India and Africa series I'm going to be talking about.